I wish I could turn the fireplaces on because then we could have a fireside chat. This is what this feels like. It's wonderful to be here, spend more time with you guys. Thanks. Given, yeah, so please feel free to jump in any part of the way with questions. We'll keep it light. I did do this talk last year. Was anyone here for last year's talk? No? Okay, cool. So some of this will be new. I did adapt it a little bit, but we'll focus more on some example dashboards, maybe some Q&A. But I'll frame it up with some what's and some how-tos. First, let me just start by contextualizing, how we got here and what the history of sharing data from Google Analytics has been typically. This is still the way a lot of people do it, but you go into Google Analytics and you can set up a bunch of different reports, you can set up alerts, and then it will email you PDFs, which is great, I guess. Like 10 years ago, you would get this PDF and you could send it off to someone and they could see a snapshot of their analytics report, right? Then they would come back to you and they would be like, oh yeah, well, what about this other thing? Or I have this other question. And then you make another PDF and then you're emailing things. And then, before you know it, there's like PDFs everywhere and you can't compare anything and like things are out of date and you're looking at a bunch of static information about dynamic content. Not so great. But why would you do that? Well, like sending your boss or someone who's not super technical into Google Analytics can be somewhat daunting. It keeps changing. They keep changing their logo. They're just like constant beta. I opened Google Analytics yesterday and I saw there were like 7 new beta tabs. And before this talk, I counted how many menu items there are on the sidebar of Google Analytics. I think there's 110 or more. I kind of lost count after a while, right? It's like, you need to know where to go in all these places. That's a lot of menu items. And inside of all those menu items, there's a lot of other things. So like uncovering the information you need and doing it reliably can be a bit of a challenge. And we're going to look at a deeper dive in a product called Google Data Studio, which is kind of like analytics meets PowerPoint, like a slideshow. So this is the Google Analytics interface where you would log in and you get these expandable sidebars, and then you get these sorts of reports, and you can set up a dashboard with these reports on them and customize it, and that's perfectly fine, viable, and there's no reason not to do that. But Google Data Studio is kind of like Google Slides, and you can drop these, widgets on top of it and customize your own dashboard and make a series of slides, format them however you like. Here's one example of a dashboard that we built. And if you stick around to the end of this talk or you check the notes or whatever, there'll be a free dashboard that you can download and play around with. You can plug your own analytics accounts into them or a demo account and see how it all populates. My name is Andrew Malice. For those of you that don't know me, I am the CEO of Kalinina. We partner with socially impactful organizations, many institutions of higher education. We are based in Oakland. Here are some of our clients. Old joke, but the Stanford logo is not something we're allowed or anyone else is allowed to use, so you get your Comic Sans. And these are some other nonprofits that we are working with these days. The DeYoung over here in San Francisco, we're redoing the Fast Track site for those of you that may have traveled the distance. That will be getting better on the front end, though we won't have the opportunity to tackle the back end just yet. But dashboards. So this is still a relatively new product, and as such, it continues to evolve like all Google things. But in 2016, there was a US public beta. It used to be a paid product, and as part of like a premier tier of analytic services, but then they kind of just opened it up and gave it away for free, which is fantastic. And one reason why I like to recommend it, because I like free things. There's a low barrier to entry, and it can empower people to own their data. One of the key features of Google Data Studio over other solutions is that it's very easy to share. It's very easy to share those reports. If you are on already some of the Google products, you can just add users who can share, edit, view as easy as any other Google Doc or spreadsheet or anything like that. Some other solutions, you have licenses, you need to log into different things and have passwords or whatever. This just is really quite seamless. But what are some of the additional advantages that you get from this kind of solution? Well, you can customize how your reports are going to look. And this may seem trivial, but you can change the colors of your pie charts and how they match your institution or your department's brand. And that's super powerful because ultimately you want to own your data, right? And you want to broadcast that. You want to feel like you are in control of your destiny. And it's a light touch, but it can signal something that this is information that you're handling. And particularly if you've got, we'll look at some reports later and you can make them fancy. So Google Data Studio connects natively to Google Analytics, but that's not all. There are many other connectors. Start here. So collect to Google Analytics, but a lot of the other Google products as well. Your ads account, you can connect to MySQL, and I'll show you guys an example of that. There are some limitations. Google Search Console, big data, but there's a growing ecosystem of third-party connectors, and there's really been a rapid expansion of that. And some of those connectors are free, some of them aren't, or they're paid. And you can take that data and then build more comprehensive dashboards, not only including analytics, but all kinds of other things, all in one place. Reddit, Pinterest, Twitter, QuickBooks. If you have a lot of different sites, say you've got 4 sites, right? You go into analytics, you look at one site, you look at another site. How do you look at everything all at the same time? Well, you can pull these things together, create a dashboard that's got reports of all your 4 sites and see how they're stacking up against one another. Pin that against the social metrics that you've got. And suddenly you've got a lot more intelligence, right? It's more than just formatting. This is the power of dashboards. There's interactivity, a high degree of interactivity that you can also have outside of, beyond just PDFs and static stuff. I'll show you guys an example of that. I'll jump into some demos in a minute. So here's one that has some polling data for the last one of the most recent tragedies in electoral politics here in the US. And but you can also do some really fun things, like here's an example that doesn't use data from analytics at all, but starts to question, what happened to M. Night Shyamalan's career as some of his movies went big and then kind of flopped, and it digs kind of deeper into data via some other sources. So let's just take a quick look at what some of these things can look like, give you a sense of the tone and the flavor of things. So here is that electoral poll data, and it shows you, what the excluding undecided in this particular view, where people were most likely to vote. But then you can do things like, you can filter out the data by gender. Now there's only a binary relationship here, so not that data isn't biased to begin with, but you can start to filter in on particular age ranges and get a dynamic view of your data in a way that doesn't require a computer science degree or a deep understanding of spreadsheets. And so that's pretty cool. But you can also in a particular dashboard include multiple pages like you would in another presentation. In this case, they have a little bit of a methodology behind the data that they collected. And you can just start to put whatever you want in here, tables, images, text, links, whatever, like you would design any other presentation. And that's kind of nifty because you want to start qualifying sometimes the data that you're presenting and contextualizing it for your viewers that may not know all of the native, all the vernacular of Google Analytics. So you can add essentially some help text or a little tour, I guess, if you like. So here's another example of some interesting storytelling that was done through Data Studio that explores the distance that we still have to close in regards to the wage gap, and gives you a little bit of information broken down by ethnicity, gender, and it's it's really quite powerful. A lot of research has gone into this. This connects back to a spreadsheet ultimately, which is super powerful because maybe you've got a bunch of data that you've got like lodged into some proprietary system. As long as you can export a CSV from it, suddenly you've got like a pipeline to having a more dynamic report. It doesn't need to be a static CSV that you're uploading all the time. It'll connect to Google Sheets. So as long as you've got a sync to that data or you're re-uploading that data, then your presentation is going to be always current. And again, because you've shared these things, you don't need to send out new versions of your dashboard. People can just go view it again and the data will be fresh. So gone is that like massive PDF problem. So here's a little dashboard that we put together for, make it a little smaller, and let's dig in. Let's go to presentation mode on it. So this is like a bit of a generic template, and I'll post a link where you guys can gain access to it and play around with it. But it takes just some really high level analytics that you would see in your account normally and freshens them up, puts them all in one place, and pulls out like what are some relatively generically useful pieces of information. Now everyone has a particular use case, right? You want to figure out what your key performance indicators are, and that's where the dashboard's really powerful. And if you can combine different data sources, it gets like increasingly interesting. But there are some nice additional features in here that allow you to do some dynamic filtering. So right now we're looking at data that is by default for a particular period, but say you wanted to know how your data was performing, not for the last 30 days, but perhaps for the whole quarter. All right. So then you can quickly and dynamically like refresh the data with a new time span. And that's super nifty. You can expose these kinds of controls like we saw earlier by gender or whatever other properties that you want to give the ability to filter down and gain more information, and expose just those options that are really relevant to your audiences. I think that's super nifty. Again, some reports you've probably seen before, and there is some latency with the Data Studio stuff. And that's because it's going and polling that information in real time from your analytics accounts. And it's also, a free product. So we can't complain too much. Little reports about landing pages and how those things convert, some traffic sources. This one I like. Let's look at the Twitter stuff. So this is one of those third-party integrations. This one is free, and it shows some integration with Twitter. Might be a little crunchy here. But what this is doing is it's going out and polling Twitter for all mentions of Kalinina. So if you were to tweet Kalinina at Kalinina or hashtag or it mentions Kalinina anywhere, then it would show up in this dashboard, which I would invite you to do. You can see it all happen. I'm going to show you a couple other features that let you do some cool things. And so we'll go into the edit mode on this particular report. You see this is all just a table. It's a little crunchy. And here's the data source, which is Twitter. I've got a couple other data sources coming in. And all the data that you were seeing before, it was using this sample Google Analytics data. So you don't need to necessarily hook into your data. They give you like a sample source that you can play around with, which is really handy. But yeah, let's take a look here at some of the data. So you have these different dimensions that you're able to modify, what essentially columns of data you're reporting back on. But I want to draw your attention to this other one here, this little local column. and we can take a closer look at that. Let's see. Oh, I don't think I have edit. Maybe on this one. Well, let's come over here. Good slides, for example. All right. So you can make these custom fields that take your data and then we'll merge them together and do a little bit of normalization. If you look at the Twitter data, there's actually no standard for identifying your location. If you can say you're from Oakland, you can say you're from Sacramento, Berkeley, CA, it's free text, which makes it really hard to report and group upon. So I wrote this little function that takes the value that Twitter gives me and then we'll normalize it and report back on anyone that's local if it meets certain criteria. And you can see that in action here. It's reporting back, yep, 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 for a bunch of people, and then nope in some areas. And here's a new one that showed up, a nice little tweet by James earlier, where his location is California, USA, and it's coming in as nope. So I could go in and modify that if the report in this window was letting me modify it by adding value into the case statement here. Cool. So let's take a closer look at some of what is possible and how potent some of these reports can be. These are some example client dashboards that we built. They have been redacted for privacy of certain sensitive information, and where it is generic, you will see, you'll gain a little bit more insight. So we like to make a little cover page that explains, what we're doing and why we're doing it. This one is more vertically oriented, and that's to cater to the needs of this particular client. They tend to print the stuff out and then sit around in a meeting every so often to look at the stuff. So that's the way it's been designed. Still, if you log in, all this stuff gives you the same level of interactivity you would expect from the kinds of widgets in Google Analytics. You can hover over things and get some detail. And so what we've put together here is some basic traffic information. And you'll notice that we're not using the vernacular of Google Analytics anymore. We're asking some questions that are more user-centric, like how much traffic do we get? What channel drives traffic? What devices are visitors using? So you're kind of lowering that barrier to understanding the nature of the data and presenting it in a more user-friendly way. I think that's quite powerful. Let's take a look at another report. So, how long are most sessions? What are the demographics of our users? And then there's a little note here about how Jay is not able to categorize all traffic by gender and age, so that this is just a sample. These are things you wouldn't necessarily see if you just log into Google Analytics, so we're providing some additional contextualization. And then you can do some cool things like, well, this one's highly redacted, which PDFs are being downloaded specifically, where and on what location. Now, this was made possible through Google Tag Manager. This isn't information that you would normally get just straight out through analytics. We have to pass explicitly pass the type of file that we're looking to download to analytics to gain these kinds of reports. And then where are people trying to contact us? Again, Google Tag Manager let us do this, so we can get which phone numbers were clicked, which email addresses were clicked, and by how many people on the website. Some reports for them about content and content consumption. And they have a customer care section, so understanding where people are navigating specific to that section is of high relevance to that division. And then again, some nice data that you can get through some plugins that you install in Google Tag Manager. The pages are redacted here, but this is a report on the most popular videos. And what's kind of nice is that it'll tell you how many times the video has been played. and how many people have watched it 25% of the way through, 50% of the way through, 75% of the way through, or 100% of the way through. And again, this isn't like native Google Analytics data. You got to install, there's a little plugin that Google, or a little connector in Google Tag Manager that'll get you this, as well as the scroll metrics. That's another addition. So you can see how far down the page people are going on the most popular pages. That's a good good view on engagement. Goals. So they had set up some goals. Goals are about conversions. Conversions are really important. It's about how successful you are at achieving the things that you're looking to do. They really wanted to, so one of the goals, they want to complete certain pages. They want to get people to their contact form, to their careers page. And so here's a little like roll up of those goals. And this is dynamic. It's based on the goals that are set inside of Google Analytics. And here are also some specific metrics about how many newsletter subscriptions are coming in. And you can use like the MailChimp connector as well to build some reports about that dynamically, how many subscribers you have, how many things have gone up and down. And Search Console. So Search Console, if you haven't connected it to your Google Analytics account, just think about doing that. You can get some nice little statistics like this. Beyond just impressions, you can find out what your average search position is for those terms that people are searching for and report back on them. So here, there's a little bit of extra data that you can get. It's kind of nifty. I'm going to jump right ahead to, I think, something that's quite compelling on the e-commerce side of things. This is for a client. They sell tickets to conferences, DrupalCon size conferences. So everything they do on their website, all the content that they generate, all the interactions that they're doing through their newsletters is leading towards people signing up for this conference. And this presents a high-level view of how effective every engagement on their website is and how it converts to a sale ultimately. Now, not every organization is sales-oriented, but there may be some other conversion points that you have, like donations or end-of-funnel interactions, like sign-ups on a form that you can connect and provide reports in this way. But here, we can see that of all of the transactions, there's about $1 per user, understanding that every user that comes to your website ends up being worth about $1. It is, I think, a really powerful statement. And it starts to transform people's understanding of digital, becomes less of an expense and suddenly more of an investment, which I think is a bit of a turning point for us in particular, who are builders of these kinds of solutions. And something that's definitely powerful. It starts to get us kind of at the table, right? So here we can dive into like how successful are some of the different channels towards that revenue goal, and what's the difference, month over month, what's successful, what's converting. Here's again, the gender data is not always accessible because users don't have it specified that often, and there's a lot of tracking blocking. But for those that do, we can find that out. And this tells a particularly unique story where, there's less transactions that are conducted by men. There's like 39 transactions for an average order value of about $1,200. And for female users on the website, there's like 91 transactions for like $900,000. So the women are conducting a lot more transactions for a slightly lower dollar value, and when it seems to be for more money, then like the men get involved, which I think is like kind of gross, but like it's interesting to see that even in progressive organizations, like this kind of gender disparity still exists. And those aren't data points that necessarily surface that easily when you look at things about storytelling and maybe motivating change, which is something I'm big on. And then you can dive into campaigns and see how effective your campaigns are and how they're transacting and how they're converting over to revenue or to your conversion goals to signups or whatever. So for every campaign that you have, every newsletter, you can see how all those things are converting over. And that's extremely powerful because again, this is live data. So you don't have to wait till the end of the month to see what's happening. Like imagine you're doing something really big. You've got like a fundraiser that you're participating in. People are like supposed to be giving donations and your whole team is behind it and they're messaging and everyone's really exhausted. And you know you're like $50,000 behind your goal or else you're not going to be able to put a new roof on the building. And Friday comes around and like everyone goes home and they're kind of like sad and stressed out. And they come back on Monday and finally it turns out that someone just, gave an anonymous donation of $100,000 on Friday. But in normal operational circumstances, it would have taken like a chain of different people to be able to spread that. And if you connect all the bits together and you can get real-time data, maybe you leave Friday as a team, like elated, happy, having met your goals. And further, maybe even able to act on that. Data is power. You can report back on the effectiveness of your ads, how well they're converting, if you're doing that kind of thing. Give a little summary. This kind of data is like extremely beneficial when your ad budget is limited. You want to make sure you're putting it in the right place. Let's jump back over to So Google is great, it's free, but it's not the be-all and end-all of your options when it comes to dashboards. We're going to talk about a few other solutions that we employ. One is Power BI, which is a Microsoft-based product. Another is Tableau. They do have a nonprofit license, which is fairly decent, but it does require these other client connectors to be able to access reports. It's quite popular in a lot of communities, and it lets you get even more creative with the display of your data. Another shout out here to Databox. This is a paid service, but they have a free trial model, which gives you quite a few reports that you can run for free. And there are a number of dashboards inside our template library that are really just good to go. Here's one example. It's a Google Analytics dashboard. And if you like it, you can use it. But one thing I like about Databox is that their dashboards are highly responsive. So they work really well on mobile. They work really well on any size screen. You can use them to build larger displays. So if you want to put a TV screen up, and you can set up different screens, and you can set them to like auto scroll, so you can get like nice little interactive, not interactive if you want to have a touch screen, but also rotating data streams, and that can be pretty cool. Particularly if you're connecting to other data sources that aren't necessarily analytics. Here's an example Power BI dashboard. You can do a lot of similar things. And here's the Tableau dashboard. It seems to be really popular in a lot of the mapping, used a lot for mapping. Mapping communities tend to like it. They have some nice reports for maps. You can see some clustering over here. The MySQL connector. Is over here. So it's still, again, fresh. There's this. This is polling MySQL database from Pantheon, and it's just returning the node table from our blog and shows the latest blog posts that we've had on the website. which can be useful, but again, it has some limited value in our context. You can't do joins right now, which kind of makes MySQL connection not that great. It is on the roadmap, at which point you can do some really interesting things. If you've got comments or other things on your blog or visits, you can correlate them to other actions on your website if they aren't already going to Google Analytics yet. Want to give a little shout out to another solution out there called Segment. Since we're talking about data and we're talking about connecting all the things, telling a coherent story across your different data streams can be a challenge. And while you can bring together different data sources into one dashboard, making sure that the continuity of user engagement is coherent across those different solutions from Facebook to your website isn't necessarily always super obvious. You can set up tracking pixels for some of these solutions, but they don't necessarily give you like a continuous user journey. You can use a middleware solution like Segment. Google Tag Manager, which I spoke about earlier and more in depth yesterday, lets you manage some of these tags, and Segment does that too. So Segment has an API for I think 2 or 3 different types of connections, one of them for analytics and another one for some marketing tools. And then you can go and turn them on and off inside of Segment instead of having to install them on your website, which is cool for a couple of reasons. One, they've pushed a lot of these organizations to offer free 30-day trials so you can try stuff out. I don't know about you, but like I hear about a new tool and someone says, oh, it's great. And I go to their website and I can't figure out what the heck it does. And they ask me to call sales. They won't tell me how much it costs. I don't even know if it's really going to be valuable to me. I have to sign up for a demo. I just want to like maybe plug it in and try it. But then what happens, you know, you want to turn it on and then it needs to start collecting data. So you're waiting maybe for a little while, like to get 30 days worth of data to try it, and then your trial's over. Well, what Segment does is, because it's a middleware, it's a data warehouse, it takes those calls, and instead of calling Google Analytics, it does an analytics call, a generic analytics call, it stores that data, then it takes care of the API connection to Google Analytics itself, and is populating your analytics with the same data that you would have if it was installed natively. But now you've got all your interactions warehoused as far as how user behavior on your site is concerned. Which means that if you want to try a different analytics package and you don't want to be held hostage by Google, you can install it and it'll replay that data from your data warehouse across the entire period of time that you've been warehousing it, which is kind of cool. It means you're kind of free of some of this vendor lock-in. And it's also nifty because then you can do things like query the data directly, and you can connect it then to your Data Studio reports. And you can present like more ambitious journeys, and you can actually use that data to inform your web applications and get into like personas, user segmenting, and more specialized kinds of displays. You know, if you want to get deeper into that kind of content personalization, at least theoretically and practically, they have this new product called Personas, which lets you look at the data in that way. They have a really good API, and they're super keen members of the open source community. So check them out if you like that kind of thing. Oh, that's them. All right. And as promised, here is a link to the GDS dashboard that I showed earlier. It's bit.ly /GDS2-1, and that'll give you the generic dashboard that I showed you earlier. But, you know, we don't need to stick to just the things that we are promoting. There are also, there's also a report gallery, and there's a number of examples, some of which I showed you here today, of things that have been built by the community generally. There's some stuff that Google has provided. There's a lot to play with here. And you can share your own and search for things that may suit your needs. Again, you can start from scratch, but like anything else, I mean, I learned Drupal best when I was exploring distributions. There were ways that people had already put things together that worked. And I started to take them apart and tinker with them. You know, it's like taking apart a clock. Then you really understand how it works. And when you can put it back together again, then I think it presents a really great big picture view. So there you go. And that's me. If you want to be in touch. Otherwise, let's chat about questions, thoughts, challenges you may have had, ideas about where this could go for you, applicability, real world context, thoughts, feelings, recriminations, rants, limericks. Yes. Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay. Well, let's see. One of the main concepts is this idea of data sources. And this report has a few different data sources. So you connect your analytics. Once it's connected, it tends to walk you through this. Let's make a copy, for example, of this report, and you'll get a quick sense of those data sources. So if you find a template and you want to get started, then it'll tell you what the original data source is, and you have an option to choose a new data source, which could be your own. Now, it's not all, your Google Analytics isn't automatically hooked into your Google Data Studio, but once you do it, then it will be there. Here's a list of the data sources that I have, that we have on our Data Studio account, and you can add one. So let's add one here. Let's say we want to look for analytics. Here's Google Analytics. So I'll select this data source, and then all of the Google Analytics accounts that you have access to will be present, and you can add them to, so here I'll add one here. This is my wife's, and you get the different views as well, so you can drill down really into which view you want to do, if you want your test view or your live view. So this is my wife's website for her artwork. All right, cool. So everything's coming in from analytics or whatever your data source is. It's like a spreadsheet, basically. You get all these fields. I don't really pay a lot of attention to this stuff. I don't think you need to either, but you can create a report from this. And there we go. We're going to add this data source. And now, all right, blank page syndrome. I'm kind of afraid of what's going on. What do I do? This is where it gets really gnarly, and why I suggest starting with a template, because you're like, what do I start with? Okay, but let's just let's have some fun here. Let's add a chart anyways. Just why not? Impromptu. But here's a pie chart. Cool. I just made a pie chart. Fantastic. And it shows some stuff for me. Oh, wonderful. Maybe it's not what I want, but I've got something. It's a data source, and it's coming with a dimension, which is the medium. But maybe I don't want to look at the medium. I want to look instead at, this is like where people are coming from, right? But maybe I want to do a report on age instead. There's no data for that because they don't track it, but let's go for browser. All right, cool. There, it's just kind of updated my spreadsheet. So the dimensions are kind of like the, so there, you'll get different metrics as well. You can rename them. You can choose how you're going to display them. So let's go in and edit this one because it'll be a little bit clearer. So here, this is one report, and I've chosen to display it. This is just the number of users, right? So there's different ways that you can choose to display it. Here's the style. So there's these kinds of comparison metrics that are possible. You have options to hide and show labels, how many decimal points you want to go into, a few display options, font size, all that kind of thing. There's lots of little doodads and things, but here if I was to take this report and copy it from one report, I don't know if this is going to work, but let's try it. Paste it. Okay, so by default, it's trying to use the same data source. So it's added that data source. The report's going to look exactly the same. But now I could change the data source here to this other one on that website. And there we go. And then maybe I don't like purple. I'm going to go with green. And then these things are resizable. You can choose some labels. You can also add, say you want to add some explanatory text, you can make a little text box here and say, you know, Stanford is the best. Worst. Sorry, Cal. It's bigger. Now it's kind of limited and funky a little bit in terms of like how the display design stuff works, but you know, it gives you some opportunity then to jam, and then you can add another page, you can make multiple pages, and all that kind of thing. Does that lower the barrier to entry a little bit? The play space? Cool, cool. Other thoughts, questions, feelings? Yeah. Any reason why you might not use this, aside from like time, you know, but. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, if your reporting needs are more complex, then you know Tableau may be a better fit. If you have limitations in terms of cost or licensing, then it may be a barrier to adoption. There are some places that refuse to use Google stuff, so that could be a reason. But Tableau, you know, it's more about like how you're gonna, if you want to cross those data streams more natively in the presentation layer, there's a new feature inside of Google Data Studio that will let you merge data sources together, so you can like cross-reference two different data streams. But Tableau does that even better. So if you wanted to correlate one data set against another data set, you can do it within that space, whereas it's a little trickier to do that with the Data Studio. You're kind of presenting the things as they come and combining and reframing them. Whereas Tableau is really about, you know, more data sophistication and maybe even like larger data sets, but there are connectors to BigQuery for Data Studio as well. And performance can be an issue also. If you have a lot of people that are accessing these reports with a high degree of concurrency, then that can be an issue. Tableau will also let you do some things like behind the firewall and in terms of like how you share those things. If your data is really highly sensitive, there can be, you know, any management of Google products is susceptible to like the user letting the world in on your data by just adding an email address to the report. So that is a little bit of can be a concern for some.